Hello guys and gals, and welcome! So today I wanted to go over legendary items with you. How do you make legendary items? What are they good for? You know, like, in general, legendary items are interesting, but there's a lot going on with legendary items, more so than just utilizing them, or finding them. First off, the occultist is going to be the main character that you're going to be paying attention to when it comes to legendary items, because you're going to use her for, number one, extracting aspects from an item, which is fairly easy. So if you happen to have a legendary aspect, like for instance, maybe you've got the Blight Defiled Area one, you could remove that and turn it into an aspect. Now, when you go to remove it, it's going to tell you all of the various items that that aspect can go on. And this is going to allow you to understand exactly, like what items you can put it on. So for this particular item, I can put this on helm, chest armor, boots, gloves, amulet, and shield. Now, you notice that when it says amulet, it says power is increased by 50%, which is interesting. So when you put a legendary affix onto a amulet, it boosts up the effect of the aspect. Now, aspects are stored right here in a relatively small space. So if I go ahead and extract this, you'll notice that it will appear in my list. Now, there are definitely various kinds of aspects. So for instance, there are legendary aspects, which are basically aspects that are pulled from low-level items. These tend to be very low in terms of their output. For instance, if you find one like this, which is the cold, cold skeletal mages cast blizzard, it ends up being a relatively low damage the lower it is. So there's three different tiers of aspects. We have the regular aspects, which comes from regular legendary items, the sacred legendary aspects, which come from sacred items, and the ancestral legendaries, which come from ancestral items. Now, I don't have any sitting in my inventory right now, so let's just go find one. I've got plenty in my stash, which I'm storing up specifically for ripping off items and imprinting onto other effects. So let's go through my stash real quick. And the difference between an ancestral and a sacred is very obvious. So if you're looking at them, the regulars have no shine. The sacreds have a golden shine, and the full versions, the ancestral versions, have a white sort of a shine around them. So let's take an item, something that I can just pull the aspect off of that's ancestral. This is a perfect blood orb one, which I was planning on utilizing on something. So let's go ahead and yank this one off. And what I'm going to show you is the difference between legendary, sacred, and ancestral in terms of the legendary aspects. Not only is there a damage difference sometimes when it comes to flat damage values, in which case you want to find the highest flat damage values that you can, there is also a difference in the way that the effect actually works on the items. So if I was to imprint these aspects onto an item, like for instance, let's just pull out anything like a pair of gloves. Let's put these up here. You'll go over to your aspects, you'll notice some of them will be grayed out, because this one in particular does not work on gloves. All right. So if I try to imbue this with a low-level aspect, it's going to cost me 12 coiling wards. That is a lot. However, you'll notice that if I use a sacred, it now only costs me 6 coiling wards, which is much less. And if I use an ancestral, which this one is helms, so let's grab helm. If I use an ancestral effect instead, it's now only going to cost me 4 coiling wards and no veiled crystals. This is because the ancestrals are more powerful and they require less coiling wards to have attached them to an item. So, and this is something that I've noticed with all of these, is that the higher ancestral legendary aspects definitely require a lot less crafting materials, which can definitely help you in the long run in terms of, utilizing things that you need. Now, each individual type of item has a different form of crafting material. Why is my head see-through? For instance, we have coiling wards themselves, which are for the armors. We have the abstruse sigils, which are for jewelry. Then we have the baleful fragments, which are for weapons. And these come specifically from items that are legendary items already. So this is very important to note, is that legendary items will only give you those fragments if you destroy them as an actual legendary item, not as an imprint. So to give you an example, I probably have something in here which is close to this. Let me just pull out anything that's not really all that amazing. We can use the bubble, perhaps. I got a bunch of different items in here, but I don't want to destroy anything that's good. I only want to destroy things that are, you know, poopy. So this one's not too amazing. It's a mid-roll. This is one that actually does have the legendary aspect on it. And then I probably have something that's imprinted. So this one right here is an imprint. And this one will not give me the item. So you notice it says imprinted. So imprinted basically means that this is not a legendary item. It is a rare item with a legendary aspect imprinted on it. If I were to deconstruct this one, I would not get an abstruse sigil. However, if I deconstruct this one, I will get a coiling ward, which is from the armor. Now, what do I mean by deconstruct? I mean actually taking it over here and destroying it. So you go over to the blacksmith, and you're actually going to take your little hammer, and you're going to destroy the item. And as you can see, I managed to get one coiling ward from that. Now, you can get coiling wards, baleful fragments, and abstruse sigils from other places besides just simply the destruction of items. They come from various places like HellTides and other events that you can do throughout the world. So keep an eye out for those because you definitely want to pick those up. They're very valuable. Another thing that you can do for legendary items is you can imbue them onto rares. Now, imbuing them onto rares is actually a very, very powerful process. And you'll notice that most of the items that I have are imprints. Pretty much everything that I'm wearing is an imprinted item. And why is this? Well, it's because the legendary items don't ever tend to drop with the effects that I want. All I'm really interested in is getting the legendary aspect from the item, not necessarily the effects on the item. So if I find something like a perfect 0.5 armor value, or, you know, like a really good bubble, perfect, 7.5 second bubble amulet, or so forth and so on, I'm going to hang on to these perfect legendary affixes for use later. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of my rare items, and I've managed to keep quite a large number specifically for that purpose. You're going to take your legendary items and you're going to imbue them onto these amazing rares that you find. And once you imbue them onto the amazing rares, then you'll have an even better item. Like, for instance, here is a dagger that has 800 item power. It has 7% damage over time, 42% overpower damage, 18% crit damage, and 21.5% to close enemies. The only reason I saved this is because I thought maybe it might be good for a, like a rogue or something like that. We also have other items like, for instance, necklaces with specific effects or wands with specific effects. Like this one right here is an 818 wand with 17% damage to slowed enemies, 23% damage to vulnerable, 26% basic skill damage, and 52 intelligence. Now, this particular wand is not perfect. Basic skill damage is probably not what we want, but everything else on here is actually pretty good. So what we would be looking for is to re-roll this to something else. Now, the problem with re-rolling this is that it will bind it to your account. Rare items are shareable. You can share these items with your friends, you can share them with your enemies, you can share them with your dog if he wants a chew stick. But when you enchant them, it's going to cost you Forgotten Souls, which are something that you can get during HellTide events. But as soon as you enchant this, as soon as you change the effect on the item, you are going to bind it to your account. And in this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and do this because I want to actually re-roll this. But let's re-roll, for instance, the basic skill damage, which is probably the one that I would re-roll here out of all of them. It's going to cost me about 78,000 gold to re-roll this one time. And I'm going to get a 26 to all stats is better than basic skill damage, so that's definitely a good roll. However, if you notice that it only cost me 76,000 for the first roll, but now it's going to cost me 394,000 for the second roll, which is pretty crazy. That's a pretty stark increase in gold cost. So if I go ahead and re-roll it again, I have now two choices. I have the overpower or the crit strike damage, or I could potentially just do no change. No change will still keep my 26 all stats, but I won't get my materials back or anything. It's just going to take those from me anyway. Now I can continue to do this over and over and over again until I get like the perfect item that I want, but the gold price is going to increase exponentially until it gets to the point where it looks like this. 3.48 million to try and re-roll this, and that's just one of the many items that I have. As you can see, this one is now 1 million to re-roll. This one is now 738,000 to re-roll, and so forth and so on. And the reason why it gets like this, the reason why it's so terrible, is because they don't really want you to re-roll these items multiple times. The more times you re-roll them, the higher the cost, and so eventually you're going to end up with millions upon millions to re-roll the item. But the interesting thing is you can make an item nearly perfect this way. For instance, this ring has a 30.8 vulnerable damage, which is pretty good, but it could be 35.3. And if I did choose to re-roll this, I could potentially try and get a better one. But let's do a cheaper one, shall we? So this one is crit, and it's, actually, is that even cheaper? I think that's the same price. Let's see if we can get a higher crit real quick. At a million and some change, I mean, that's a chance, but we might get a little bit of higher crit on this item. So let's give it a try. And looks like we went down, so 4.5 instead of 5.7, so we definitely don't want to do that one. And we just spent 1,200,000 gold to do nothing for a chance at potentially getting a better effect than what we already had. Now, once you get your legendary item how you want it, once you have your rare item in the, in the place that you want it with the damage that you want it, you definitely want to upgrade it. So this is another thing that you're going to have to do for your rare items to get them in their optimal state. Now, upgrading rare items is actually pretty cheap for the first couple upgrades. So as you can see, it only costs iron chunks for the first upgrade, and it's relatively inexpensive. Silver ore for the second at 4,000, which is also relatively inexpensive. And then the third upgrade is actually just veiled crystals, which is also very inexpensive. It's not until you get to the fourth upgrade that we actually go into the baleful fragments. Now this is kind of expensive. So the baleful fragments is going to bring this up to the fourth upgrade. And then finally, the last upgrade is the one that is the most expensive, and this one costs Forgotten Souls, which are going to be something that you're going to have to get within the HellTide events, as well as more Baleful Fragments. But upgrading this to its maximum is going to bring it to a very nice 818 plus 25, which is a pretty large damage bump for a weapon. This is 820 is actually the highest that you could possibly get, so this is only 2 points off of the highest that you can get for the item. Then you can take this particular item over here to the Occultist, and you can actually attach a legendary affix. So there are tons and tons of legendary affixes throughout the game, and obviously, if you throw your item up here and go over to your aspects, you can, of course, go through these legendary aspects one by one and see which one you would like to put on the weapon. You can also use the Codex of Power. So there are individual codexes for every class, and there are also ones that are more generic that you can throw on specific items. And you can imbue these effects onto your item. Now keep in mind, though, that these effects are usually the minimum roll of the legendary aspects, and you would probably be much better off finding one of these as opposed to one of these. For instance, this one here is 1.5 seconds and 50% bonus for Bone Spear. The one that I have, however, is 4.2 and 185%. So a pretty stark contrast between the lowest possible roll and a decent roll, as you can see. Now, once you imbue the item, it becomes a legendary item, right? So like if I just go ahead and imbue this on here right now, it's going to cost me 12 Baleful Fragments, which is pretty expensive, but let's just go ahead and do that real quick. And now we have a wand, which has the legendary affix on it. Now let's say later on I wanted to replace this with something else. You can. You can replace this with other aspects. So you can put another one up here, and you can re-imprint over an imprint with a different aspect. So don't be afraid to utilize the Codex of Power to get the effects that you need, and then later on, when you do have one that's better, you can override it with the better aspect, which is actually pretty neat. I actually made the mistake of overriding one of mine with the same exact aspect, so don't do that like me. All in all, I definitely think that the legendary system is very interesting, and it makes so that you're going to be going through all of your rares before you sell them. I mean, one of the things that I do all the time is I take these rares to the stash or to the salesman, one or the other, either the blacksmith to destroy them or either here to sell them for money. And I literally just go through them and I'm like, okay, 784 item power, that's not the greatest. The effects kind of suck. Gone. Helmet. Cooldown reduction is decent. That's actually a perfect cooldown reduction. Life regeneration while not damaged is okay. All stats is decent. One of those could be re-rolled potentially, so it's not like the worst helmet in the world. If I wanted to re-roll one, I would probably re-roll the life regeneration while not damaged recently. But you could potentially end up with a nice item there. So let's hold on to that. These gloves are 2 ranks to blight. I don't need that. 18 all stats, injured enemies. So since you can only re-roll one effect, if they don't have the effects that you want, then, you know, you generally just don't want to grab them. In this particular case, blight is not something that I'm interested in, and injured enemies is not something that I'm interested in. So this is something that I would probably sell to the NPC. Sacred items tend to be not worth using after around level 60. After 60, ancestral items take over. And so, since this one requires level 77, I'm just going to sell this one as a matter of course. Here we have an ancestral amulet with 7% intelligence, 5.5 strength, 7.3 willpower, and 5.2% cooldown reduction. Now, it's interesting from a standpoint of just simply massive stats. I mean, if I throw this on right now, you'll notice my strength, intelligence, and willpower will all rise pretty nicely from putting on that amulet, and my attack power even goes up as well because it's a pretty huge bump in my intelligence, which is actually kind of nice. But the problem is that I don't need all of those stats. I don't need the strength. The willpower is decent because it gives me resource regeneration as well as overpower damage, but I would probably have to reroll at least one of those effects, and I'm not really 100% sure whether I want to keep that one or not. Here we have another sacred item, so no good. Another sacred item, so no good. Another sacred item, and no good. Then we have a sword, which is 801. That's a pretty high item power. Damage over time with shadow, overpower, core skill, and basic. So unfortunately, there's 2 modifiers there that I wouldn't want, so I'm going to go ahead and sell that. And then finally, we have a ring, which I'm going to judge based on its affix. So this one in particular is 7%. It can roll up to 10. So I'm probably not going to use this one. But we could also take a look at the stats because it could be overwritten. So 3.4 crit is pretty low out of 5. Cold skill damage, life regeneration, and damage to close enemies. It's not super good. Unfortunately, the crit is really low, and I would have to re-roll the life regen, so probably not going to be something that I would use. So this one we're going to take to the blacksmith, and we're going to deconstruct this for an abstruse sigil. That's going to give us one of the abstruse sigils, which is going to help us out. Overall, the entire legendary item system is actually pretty amazing, and I've actually been enjoying it quite well. One of the things that I enjoy most about the system is sharing rare items with other people within my group, because it gets them the items that they need. And this is something that I'm just having a blast with. If you have any questions about the legendary item system, you're looking at, you know, specific effects, you want to know something, you know, if I have a question, feel free to post a comment down below. For the most part, legendary affixes will always do what they say in all of the slots except for the amulet and the two-handed weapons. So two-handed weapon slots actually get a 100% bonus, and amulets get a 50% bonus. And this is something that you can see by going over various items. Like, for instance, this one right here, which is the conceited, says two-handed weapons power increased by 100%, amulet in power increased by 50%. This means that these particular aspects are something that you're going to want to consider, like, should I put this in my two-handed weapon, or should I put this in my amulet slot, which makes your amulet and two-handed weapon slots extremely valuable when it comes to stuff like this, because you can enhance the power of a specific aspect to the moon and back. Now this is why I have this particular aspect on my two-handed scythe, and it's specifically because it gets a huge damage bonus from just simply being on the scythe. If it were on a an amulet or a ring or something like that, it would be less effective. And this one is actually very key to this build because it gives me a huge damage bump in the return splinters that come from my attack. So making that consideration on like which abilities is going to go on your amulet and your your two-handed weapon is going to be a pretty big consideration. For me particularly, when I'm using Bone Spear has these return effects. Which for some reason, there we go, are not happening. Now, if I crit, I get 5, and if I don't crit, I get 3, but these return spears are part of the ability, right? Well, I get a 185% damage bonus on the return spears if I have this aspect in a weapon. However, a two-handed weapon. However, if it's in something like a ring and doesn't get the additional bonus, it can actually be pretty low, even as low as 50%, which is terrible. Comparatively between the two, I mean, it's more than 3 times the damage output increase. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just yakking about the legendary items. And I hope I've given you some insight on how to get your legendary items perfected. As always, keep watching.